What's up, Shiver Stands? I'm Quackers Co., and this is the Salmon Run Fish Fry for October 21st, being held at the spawning grounds. Our cookware for this rotation is the TriSlosher, the Splat Roller, the Bloblobber, and the... Yeah, I'm pretty sure. The TriStringer. This rotation is going to be incredibly difficult, and to better understand why it's going to be so difficult, I want to talk about weapon rolls. If we look at all the weapon compositions for future rotations, we can notice a bit of a pattern. The first two weapons of the compositions, the first two weapons on the left have really good mobility, which means they can paint really well. They also usually have a little bit more close range damage, which should be used for lesser control. These weapons can take out bosses pretty well, but they should spend their time focusing on lessers and moving eggs to the basket. The third weapon of these compositions are what I would consider more of an ADC, which means attack damage carry. These weapons can usually cause massive damage, and they should spend their time focusing both on lessers and bosses, supporting the players that are going down to the shoreline, but also supporting the other player of the composition. And that fourth player of the composition is the long-range weapon. This weapon can usually cause massive damage, but usually in a very specific area. This weapon can usually destroy any lesser, but should focus their time on bosses, using that range to their advantage for not getting too close. So then as the other players toss eggs towards the basket, they can deliver them and then get back to their role that they need to play. It's always good to know what weapons work really well against bosses, but usually this general method of gameplay will yield success. During an extra wave, our weapon rolls slightly change. Since we're not working towards a quota, we're only working towards causing damage to one specific enemy. But if we don't take out bosses, we won't have the golden eggs in order to cause all of the damage we need. And if we don't take out lessers, we'll be overran and we won't be able to move through the map. So the first two weapons of the composition should do their job of moving around the map, taking out lessers, and any shoreline bosses that will be a nuisance. And as soon as you take out a shoreline boss, grab your egg, go hit the Kohozuna, and cause some damage. But remember all that mobility you have. But with the closer range of these weapons, if you get too close, the Kohozuna will target you, and you might find yourself with tunnel vision getting taken out by lessers or a boss. So almost as soon as you're targeted, try to get away from him and go collect the other eggs that the Snatcher is probably taking from that boss that you took out. And then come back, do it again, rinse and repeat. The third weapon, the ADC, should focus more of their damage onto the Kohozuna. If the first two weapons are taking out lessers, you can focus your damage on the Kohozuna, taking out bosses, and supporting the other players in the match. The fourth weapon of the composition is the weapon that changes the most in an extra wave. This weapon should primarily focus their damage on the Kohozuna. And with the long range that you have, you don't need to get too close to anything. So even if everybody goes down, you should still be up and be able to use your range to revive everybody. And also with that range, you'll be able to take out bosses, creating more golden eggs around the map. Since you don't need to take the eggs to the basket in an extra wave, there's no reason to focus so much on taking out all the bosses. Everybody should focus on taking out those primary targets, like stingers or flyfish, but as long as everybody stays decently spread out through the map and collectively cause damage to the Kohozuna, both with golden eggs and with their weapon, you should be able to take them out no problem. The biggest failures I usually see on a Kohozuna match anymore are because everybody pushed shoreline bosses, and 75% of all the enemies collectively take them all out. And if you did take a bunch of shoreline bosses out, and you're right there at the shoreline, remember that those golden eggs are just general blasts that cause massive damage. So if there's a bunch of eggs at the shoreline, remember to bounce in between hitting the Kohozuna, hitting lessers, and taking out bosses. But please do not linger there at the shoreline. During an extra wave, there's no reason to rush anything. Remain calm and splat that big guy. Not that big guy. Alright, let's get into the cookware. Our first cooking utensil is the TriSlosher. The TriSlosher has some incredible paintability, but you need to remember its shorter range will have you getting a little bit closer to some enemies. And all the sloshing weapons have more ink fall damage, which means that blob of ink that goes into the air will cause damage as it drops down. So if you're dealing with a large group of enemies, try to slosh above them, that way that spread causes damage to both enemies closer and further away from you. Since we have a roller in this rotation, you should be able to spend more of your time painting walls instead of the turf. Our second cooking utensil is the Splat Roller. Luckily, the roll of the Splat Roller can take out chum and small fry, so it'll be really handy on a glowflies or a griller's match for lesser control. Cohawks will take 2 hits, both with flings or flicks, before you can roll over them. So just remember that before you start rolling over a horde. And of course, hopefully your Tri-Slosher player is painting those walls, that way you can focus on rolling over the turf and getting ink everywhere. Our third cooking utensil is the Bloblobber. And this is what's going to make this rotation so incredibly difficult. The Bloblobber's range only depends on how far the blobs you lobs can bounce. So if you deal with a high tide, that whole gray area cuts out the range of the Bloblobber. So the odds are you'll find yourself with more close range combat than ever before. Luckily, if it's any other occurrence, if those blobs drop through the grates, they will keep going and maybe cause damage to enemies below it. And a wall painting tip for the Bloblobber: if you find two parallel walls that you can paint, if you put your back to one of them and you start firing at the other one, it'll paint both walls pretty well. Our last cooking utensil is the... Is it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. The TriStringer. When you charge up the TriStringer, there's two different beeps that it lets out. That first beep will fire the explosive bolts, but more notably in Salmon Run, that first beep is enough power to take out Chum. It's also enough power to take out multiple stinger lids with a vertical shot. Once this weapon's fully charged, it can splat cohawks in a single shot. But because this weapon has no piercing damage, try to focus your damage on bosses and larger enemies. Swimming and doing a jumping vertical shot can help you with mobility around this map. And my final tip for spawning grounds is something I've said before. The Salmonids use the walkways and inclines, so we should spend our least amount of time walking and using those inclines. Always figure out a way to swim through this map in an unpredictable way. And when I say unpredictable, remember that the Salmonids are CPUs, and the Salmonids have very simple movement. And remember that the fish fry usually comes out before the stage rotation, so if you want to catch these updates when they're hot and fresh, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. And if you want other fellow Grizzco employees to receive these tips, make sure you like and share the video. Bye-bye.